Okay, I just discovered this Professor Robert Nemiroff, and he emphasizes that he is not a photon, but he has a 2023 book um, on superluminal, what he calls photonic booms in relativity, and it's based on what is observed relativistically in terms of the angular momentum. And essentially, he's saying that you end up creating two images, and one of the images is superluminal. Um, and but then he has two talks on YouTube. So if you watch those talks, he will explain it much better than I can. But it essentially has to do with the idea of the orbital velocity being smaller than the wavelength of the frequency of the light. And when you have an orbital velocity being smaller, then depending on the handedness of the rotation, it creates a superluminal shadow of the light, or what he calls an illumination front. Now he says that, for example, if you had like the bat signal as a laser on a wall, um, the bat signal could not communicate any information that was superluminal except to itself. And then he says, but he's not a photon. So I found this ironic because the whole point of meditation is like you are defining yourself as the photon, and you're turning the photon around, and therefore accessing this superluminal signal. And it is very much in terms of, like, if you have precognitive visions, that's precisely what's happening. Is you have two images, and the one from the future is actually um, more real than the one that you experience later on in linear space-time. And in terms of quantum physics, this would be defined as virtual photons with negative frequency. But in terms of relativity, it's defined as this difference between the wavelength and the orbital velocity being smaller than the wavelength of the light, is like the vertex. And another analogy he says is, if when you have a scissors, like a guillotine, that vertex of the scissors can have a superluminal speed in terms of photons. Now, the he says he's just talking about this in terms of relativity and not quantum physics. But the irony of that is that Louis de Broglie was critiquing relativity when he created his law of phase harmony. So he realized that as a particle goes towards the speed of light, then time slows down, which means the wavelength gets bigger. But in terms of quantum physics, the frequency goes up because the frequency is directly proportional to the momentum. And since frequency is inverse to time from the law of Pythagoras, that means the wavelength gets smaller. And so you have a direct contradiction between relativity and quantum physics. And he says that therefore there has to be a second time from the future that is a phase that harmonizes with um, the time from the past. And so this is what he called the law of phase harmony. And so it defined, it then led to the use of the photon is directly proportional to momentum. And that's what people usually learn when they study de Broglie in physics class. They don't learn law of phase harmony. So this guy, Dr. Robert, what's his name? Perinoff or something? Nemiroff. He calls it the imaging relativistic image Dopplering effect. And he says that when he realized this was true, the only example he could find was this study on quasars in the 70s that mentioned it in one paragraph and did not elaborate on it. But he said that that's why when you study quasars in deep space, you get these two images that appear. One of them is superluminal. But he said that, if you were able to utilize the shape of objects, because the way, if you are able to, I don't know all the details, but um so I just I find it ironic because he's trying to stay away from quantum physics, but Louis de Broglie created quantum physics from his critique of relativity. So um there's there's really no way to escape the connection to quantum physics. And what the usual understanding is that there's no way you can have a superluminal um, laser because of quantum physics. Because the particle, every time you observe the particle, it's being recreated due to the collapse of the wave function creating the particle. So you're seeing, like, it looks like the lasers moving, but in fact it's just a particle being recreated because you can't actually observe the photon at the speed of light. And so, yeah, there's definitely some interesting paradoxes, and I look forward to studying his research more. I don't know. I try to look at his book, and he says he puts jokes in every chapter to try to make it more readable, and he likes to joke around all the time. But I didn't notice any jokes, and he says he tries not to use any equations. But it's pretty dry stuff because it's just all he says. It's just like basic geometry, right? So it's just orbital geometry and all that, and um like you're looking at like a technical draft for a building or something. I don't know, but yeah. So I would encourage him to try to be the photon, embrace his inner photon. And anyway, still, it's cool that he's acknowledging that this is a real effect, and that people would observe these things. But the question is, what does it mean in terms of the definition of reality? And when you ask that question, you're forced to consider the quantum physics aspect of it. So I'll probably email him, and I don't. Sounds like he doesn't want to deal with quantum physics, but he should. Like the law of phase harmony was just as much about relativity, and that's what the quisical group focuses on. Is that um, quisical? That the quantum physics is really from relativity. But I mean, you could go either way. You could say, it's a critique of relativity. So